The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the icy landscape with relentless fury. Elena tightened her parka, her breath forming tiny clouds in the freezing air. The Arctic Research Station was her home for the past 6 months, but tonight felt different. The storm had come out of nowhere, and the temperature was dropping faster than she had ever seen. She was about to head back inside when a faint glow caught her eye. It was barely visible through the swirling snow, but it pulsed like a heartbeat. Curiosity tugged at her, and she trudged toward it, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. As she got closer, the glow intensified, revealing a strange metallic object half buried in the snow. It looked like a pot of some kind, its surface covered in intricate patterns that shimmered in the dim light. Elena's heart raced. This wasn't human technology. Before she could process what she was seeing, the pod hissed open, releasing a cloud of steam. Elena stumbled back, her eyes widening as a figure emerged. It was a man, or at least, something resembling a man. His skin glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. He collapsed into the snow, his body trembling violently. Elena hesitated for only a moment before rushing forward. Despite his alien appearance, he looked vulnerable, almost human. She grabbed his arm, surprised by the heat radiating from his skin. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. The alien's eyes flickered open, and he stared at her with a mixture of confusion and desperation. "Cold," he rasped, his voice deep and guttural. "Too cold." Elena's mind raced. She couldn't leave him out here, he would freeze to death. With a grunt of effort, she slung his arm over her shoulders and began dragging him toward the station. His body was surprisingly light, but the heat coming off him was almost unbearable. By the time they reached the station, Elena was drenched in sweat. She kicked the door open and hauled the alien inside, collapsing onto the floor beside him. The warmth of the station seemed to revive him slightly, and he groaned, his glowing skin flickering like a dying flame. "Who are you?" Elena asked, kneeling beside him. He turned his head to look at her, his fiery eyes locking onto hers. "Kale," he said, his voice strained. "I am Kale of the EmberClan." "EmberClan?" Elena repeated, her mind spinning. "Where are you from?" "A world far from here," Kale replied, his breathing labored. "A world of fire and ash. This cold, it is killing me." Elena's scientific curiosity battled with her instinct to help. She had so many questions, but right now, saving his life was the priority. "What do you need?" "Heat," Kale said, his voice barely a whisper. "I need heat." Elena nodded and quickly set to work. She dragged him closer to the station's heating unit, wrapping him in blankets and turning the temperature up as high as it would go. Kale's skin began to glow brighter, and he let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. "You saved my life." Elena sat back, her mind racing. An alien. A real, live alien. And not just any alien, one who seemed to defy everything she knew about biology. His skin was hot to the touch, his eyes burned like coals, and his very presence filled the room with an almost palpable energy. "What happened to you?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Kale's expression darkened. "My ship was damaged. I was forced to eject before it crashed. I did not expect to find myself in such a hostile environment." "Hostile is an understatement," Elena said with a wry smile. "This is one of the coldest places on Earth." "Earth," Kale repeated, as if testing the word. "Your world is beautiful, but it is not kind to my kind." Elena studied him, her scientific mind already working overtime. "Your body temperature, it's incredibly high. How do you survive on your planet?" "My people evolved in a world of constant heat," Kale explained. "Our bodies generate and retain thermal energy. This cold. It drains me, weakens me." Elena nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to stabilize your temperature." If we can find a way to keep you warm, you might be able to recover. Kale looked at her, his fiery eyes filled with gratitude. You are kind, human. Most would fear me. I'm a scientist, Elena said with a shrug. Fear is the enemy of understanding. Kale's lips curved into a faint smile. You are unlike any human I have ever heard of. Elena felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the heating unit. Let's focus on keeping you alive. We can worry about introductions later. As the storm raged outside, Elena and Kale worked together to stabilize his condition. She used every resource at her disposal, from heated blankets to portable heaters, while Kale explained more about his physiology. The more she learned, the more fascinated she became. But as the hours passed, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was more than just chance. There was something about Kale, something that drew her to him in a way she couldn't explain. And as the night wore on, the line between scientist and savior began to blur. The storm outside had subsided, leaving the research station enveloped in an eerie silence. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Elena monitored Kale's condition. His skin still glowed faintly, but the intense heat had subsided to a more manageable level. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, her laptop balanced on her knees as she recorded every detail of his physiology. Your body temperature is stabilizing, she said, glancing at the thermometer she had rigged to measure his heat output. But it's still higher than any human could survive. Kale leaned back against the wall, his fiery eyes watching her intently. Your technology is primitive, but effective, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Elena raised an eyebrow. Primitive? This primitive technology just saved your life. True, Kale conceded, his lips curving into a faint smile. I owe you a debt, human. Elena, she corrected. My name is Elena. Elena, Kale repeated, as if testing the sound of it. It suits you. She felt a flush of warmth at his words but quickly pushed it aside. We need to figure out how to keep you alive long-term. Your body can't handle this cold, and I don't have the resources to keep the heating system running at full capacity indefinitely. Kale's expression grew serious. On my world, we use thermal crystals to regulate our body heat. Without them, I will eventually succumb to the cold. Thermal crystals, Elena's eyes lit up with curiosity. What are they made of? How do they work? They are rare minerals that absorb and store heat, Kale explained. We carry them with us when we travel to colder climates. Unfortunately, mine were destroyed in the crash. Elena's mind raced. If we could find a way to replicate their properties, we might be able to create something similar. Do you have any samples? Any data? Kale shook his head. Nothing survived the crash. But perhaps your technology can help. You have shown remarkable ingenuity already. Elena smiled, feeling a surge of determination. All right. Let's get to work. Over the next few hours, Elena and Kale collaborated on a makeshift thermal regulator. Using materials from the research station, they fashioned a device that could absorb and store heat, mimicking the properties of Kale's lost crystals. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. As they worked, Elena couldn't help but notice how close they were. Kale's presence was intoxicating, his heat, his scent, the way his eyes seemed to burn into her soul. She found herself stealing glances at him, her heart racing every time their hands brushed. You are unlike any human I have ever encountered, Kale said suddenly, breaking the silence. Elena looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Your curiosity, your determination, it is rare among your kind, he said, his voice soft. Most would have left me to die. I couldn't do that, Elena replied, her cheeks flushing. It's not in my nature. Kale studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. You are fascinating. Elena's breath caught in her throat. There was something in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. She quickly looked away, focusing on the device in her hands. "We should test this," she said, holding up the makeshift thermal regulator. "See if it can stabilize your temperature." Kale nodded, and Elena attached the device to his arm. It hummed softly as it began to absorb the excess heat from his body. Kale let out a sigh of relief, his glowing skin dimming slightly. "It works," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "You are truly remarkable, Elena." She smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "It's not perfect, but it should buy us some time. We'll need to keep refining it, though." Kale reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Elena's heart raced at his touch, but before she could respond, the sound of footsteps outside the door made her freeze. "Elena? Are you in there?" It was Dr. Marcus, her colleague. Elena's eyes widened in panic. She hadn't told anyone about Kale, and she wasn't sure how they would react to his presence. "Stay here," she whispered to Kale, quickly covering him with a blanket. "Don't make a sound." She hurried to the door, opening it just enough to block Marcus's view of the room. "Hey, Marcus. What's up?" Marcus frowned, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "I thought I heard voices. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Elena said, forcing a smile. "Just working on some experiments." Marcus didn't look convinced. "You know the rules, Elena. No unauthorized experiments. Especially not during a storm." "I know," Elena said, her mind racing, "it's nothing major. Just some temperature readings." Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding, "All right. But be careful. We can't afford any accidents out here." "I will," Elena promised, closing the door as soon as he turned to leave. She leaned against the door, letting out a shaky breath. That was too close. "Who was that?" Kale asked, his voice low. "My colleague," Elena replied, her heart still pounding. "He's suspicious. We need to be careful." Kale's expression darkened. "If they discover me, they will not understand. They will see me as a threat." "I won't let that happen," Elena said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." Kale looked at her, his fiery eyes filled with gratitude. "You continue to surprise me, Elena." She smiled, feeling a surge of determination. "We're not done yet. Let's keep working." As they returned to their project, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their bond was growing stronger with every passing moment. But with Marcus's suspicions growing, she knew they were running out of time. The quantum research station hummed with an unusual tension. Zara Novak stood before the holographic display, her fingers dancing across translucent interfaces that mapped the intricate quantum signatures spreading like neural networks across deep space. Beside her, Krenel's multi-jointed appendages moved with precision, calibrating sensors that looked more like living crystals than technological instruments. "The quantum resonance is increasing," Krenel observed, their translator device converting the melodic clicks and harmonics of their native language into crisp English. "Your human perception cannot fully comprehend the harmonic shifts we're detecting." Zara raised an eyebrow. Their relationship had evolved from initial mistrust to a complex collaboration that defied traditional scientific boundaries. "Try me," she challenged, her voice carrying a mix of determination and intellectual curiosity. The station's environmental systems fluctuated subtly. Outside the reinforced observation windows, the void of space seemed to ripple, not with light, but with something more fundamental. Quantum entanglement was no longer just a theoretical concept, it was becoming a tangible reality that both threatened and promised to reshape their understanding of existence. Krenel's bioluminescent skin shifted through a spectrum of blues and greens, a physiological response that Zara had learned indicated deep concentration. "The convergence point is approaching," they said, their translator adding a note of urgency. "The quantum boundaries between our dimensional understanding are becoming permeable." Zara's quantum mapping system began to generate patterns that looked less like scientific data and more like living, breathing art. Fractals of light and dark intertwined, showing connections between particles that should have been impossible to link across such vast distances. The Andromeda Nexus warned me about this, Krenel continued, their crystalline sensory tendrils extending toward the holographic display. Certain quantum events can create resonance bridges, pathways between what your species considers separate realities. The research station's chief scientific advisor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, entered the observation deck. Her entrance broke the intense focus, but only momentarily. She understood something extraordinary was unfolding. The quantum signatures are unlike anything in our previous models, Elena said, her voice a mix of excitement and controlled professional analysis. Zara, your initial theoretical work on quantum harmonic convergence is proving more accurate than we could have imagined. Krenel's translator interpreted their response with a hint of what could only be described as scientific pride. My collective's research suggested such possibilities, but empirical evidence was always elusive. Your human capacity for lateral thinking has been instrumental. The compliment was genuine, a far cry from their initial encounters when mutual incomprehension seemed the only shared language. A sudden surge of energy rippled through the station. Quantum indicators spiked, creating a symphony of light and mathematical precision across multiple displays. Zara felt something beyond mere scientific observation, a connection that transcended traditional understanding. The boundary is thinning, Krenel announced, their body now pulsing with an intense emerald luminescence. We are witnessing a quantum event that could redefine interdimensional communication. Elena approached the primary console, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Stabilization protocols are holding, but only just. Whatever is happening is pushing the limits of our technological comprehension. Zara moved closer to Krenel, an unconscious gesture of solidarity. Their collaborative work had brought them to this moment, a potential breakthrough that could transform humanity's understanding of quantum mechanics and interstellar communication. The station's quantum resonance chamber began to vibrate, not with mechanical precision, but with a living, almost organic rhythm. Particles danced across dimensional boundaries, creating patterns that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. We're more than observers, Zara whispered, realizing the profound implications of their work. We're participants in a cosmic dialogue that spans realities. Krenel's translator captured the subtle emotional undertones of their response. Convergence is not just about scientific discovery. It is about understanding, the most complex quantum state of all. As the quantum boundaries continued to pulse and shift, Zara, Krenel, and Elena stood witness to a moment that promised to rewrite everything they understood about science, connection, and the very fabric of existence. The harmonic convergence was just beginning.